So we huddled in back, and everybody agreed after I demanded to start with a question that kind of gets at, for us personally, probably more than anything else, what a story of cultural significance is. So it's a direct question to each of the panelists, and they can decide amongst themselves who will go first. But the question is, what are one or two of your favorite stories of cultural significance?
I could.
Oh, you say.
I could jump in because you demanded. When I heard the question first, what came to my mind right away was Middle Passage, the Charles Johnson. I think I was really into that because writers talk a lot about what gives you permission, and I think a lot of when writing and sort of media in general, when you think of slavery, especially chattel slavery, it's sort of like this 12 years a slave, sort of really grim sort of energy, which makes sense. It's a horrific tragedy and genocide, but he found a way to talk about that with some levity or with some humor and create some kind of sort of a grand voyage, epic energy.
It's an adventure story.
It's an adventure
as opposed
story.
To just this tragic, yeah.
So that's huge for me. Then my second choice would be the Third Life of Grange Copeland, just because it taught me something I really care about in fiction, which is to create a character that
That's me. Right.
That's okay. No, create a character that you
Alice Walker.
Maybe hate and then can love and then maybe hate again, and so that felt like two for me.
Because you asked me, I immediately think of Toni Morrison, and in part it is the permission issue. Right now, in particular, it's always Song of Solomon, and I was thinking about Beloved 2. And I think that just reading her work was such an inspiration to me, and it really taught me about what was possible to express through fiction and language, and also about really sort of seizing control or authority with respect to the idea of what was real. Right? How the real world is constituted, and often how that, I don't know, how race in particular and also gender impact that. My experience of reality as being specific to the way in which I experience it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just like an objective thing that has to be dealt with in that way, that I can somehow claim ownership of it through language and through naming. And through rhythm, right?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Now, those are two very different works, and I would say they are of cultural significance in very different ways, right? You've got Beloved, which is an epic story set in slavery. And then you've got a more modern setting and very different subject matter for Song of Solomon. So I'm just wondering about what each of those choices says about what you think is a culturally significant work.
Well, one of the things, I was thinking it's actually in terms of both of them, but sort of the presentation of history, and particularly Black women in relation to slavery and maternity, what it meant to be a mother, whether or not you are deemed property and chattel by other people, and sort of the complexity of that. And acknowledging, for me personally, this is how I would put it, that my ancestors are part of my humanity. So to denigrate their humanity is to denigrate myself. And I could really feel that when I read that book. That's what I remember. That's one of my early memories of what that book felt like. It was an acknowledgement.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of my ancestors' humanity, and at the same time of mine, because they are my ancestors. Yes.
Right. Well, I love Toni too. I'm not sure why I'm stuck on this, but actually I am, because it seems to me Song of Solomon is a work that is of great literary significance.
Well, that's what I was talking about, rhythm and language too.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to, maybe I'm the geek here, something of cultural significance, which...
Well, language, how is that not part of culture?
Well, this is the debate. Now, isn't it?
Whoa.
Yeah, exactly. And I would argue for the, in the greater sense, yes. But maybe we'll come around to that again when we talk about what some other
Okay.
some other things I have in mind.
Okay.
Maurice?
Yeah. Can y'all hear me out there? Let's see. Who's the
you
stand in the
hear
middle carrier?
Mo?
Can you hear me? Barely. All right.
Barely.
Let's try it like
Lean
this.
in.
Make sure the equipment's proper first. Hello, everybody. How you doing today? For me, I agree with everything here. First of all of these people's books to me are culturally significant. I'm not just saying that because you're here, because I've read all the books. And so I think about this because it's recent, American Fiction, the movie, right? Based on Percival Everett's Erasure. And there's a scene in both the book and the movie in which he goes to the store and he is kind of upset that his books have been like put in the black section, right? And for me, cultural significance, I guess, is I can go to a bookstore and I can see my people's books. So for me specifically, that means like Sarah Broom. We're from the same neighborhood. You know, the Yellow House is my neighborhood. I'd never seen that in the book until my sister wrote that book, for example. And I kind of go the next level up and I kind of go, okay, well, we have Ramadan Ramsey. And with that book, we're seeing, you know, this kid is like, he's half black, he's half Muslim, and he has this amazing story that is a very New Orleans story I've never seen anywhere else. Then we get across America, we get the Rib King, you know, for example. And we have this family with these relationships and this sort of magical realism, these like superpowers, that kind of stuff. As we sort of expand, I mean, everything my brother over here has done, the king, as I call him. I mean, look, Friday Black, when I read that book, it was like what you were saying about Middle Passage, where it was like, you can do this? Like, you can actually do this in a book of short stories in America, you know, 2018 or whatever. And so when I say cultural significance, obviously it's everything Toni Morrison ever wrote, it's everything Ralph Ellison wrote, you know, Richard Wright, but it's also the modern writers who are bringing these fresh perspectives where I can go in the store and kind of go, well, sure, I could buy some Virginia Woolf and some, you know, Faulkner, but I want to buy y'all books. And so that's why we're here right now, because this is what it looks like today. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm going to answer. Because it wouldn't be fair if I didn't try the question on myself, and I did, and I immediately answered Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Okay, which is very different from the other answers.
But that's got Jim. That's got Jim in it, right?
Yeah, right.
Just kidding.
A little different. So I don't know what that means, but it says something about me that's the first thing that came to my mind. I like Twain. I like the humor. I like the adventure of the story, the stepping outside of whatever it is that might appear to be culturally significant. Telling a story of a kid with a slave on a river, it was just insane. He's out of his mind, but it works. I think we can say, 150 years later, it works. So that's mine. I think I like metaphor, and I think metaphor with meaning. So that's where I land, and we can come back around to that too. Okay. How important is it to you? This is going to dive into some of what we're talking about. How important is it to you as an artist to create stories of cultural significance? When you sit down to write, is this a reason why you sit down to write? Some of the answers indicate maybe, maybe not, but let's hear the answers. Yeah.
Did some of them indicate maybe not?
I think when you start talking about language...
Really?
No. I'm just saying, in a way that it's, if you want to write just pure language, you're going to write a story that is just language. It better be really, really great, I guess, to be of cultural significance.
For the example I gave, I don't think she wrote.
I'm not talking about Toni Morrison.
No, I know. I'm talking about the possibilities in terms of the different meanings you can twist from words.
Yeah.
In terms of stuff like that.
I wouldn't be alive if I couldn't do that.
All right. Yeah.
It's interesting to think about it because if does cultural significance derive from the subject the author chooses to engage with, in your mind?
Yeah.
And if that's true, I don't know. I think that the attention and seriousness that you imbue to whatever subject will either in that moment or in the eye of time make that feel as though it's has some cultural significance. I think, and I'm thinking about with my newer book, obviously culturally we've been having a discussion around policing and prisons on some, maybe more policing. I think that some people eventually understand that policing and prisons and the carceral state are sort of one entity. But I think a lot of the protests that were happening especially during pandemic, but way before that as well. Maybe this sort of wave being sparked by Trayvon Martin. A lot of people were thinking about the extrajudicial killing of black people in general, and then maybe realizing that the carceral state was a great administrator of that kind of violence. So, but the reason I say like cultural significance thing is that my book is thinking a lot about prisons, maybe more particularly like the carceral state. And I had been working on it for like 7 years, and I hadn't in my head said, oh, I want to write something of cultural significance. But I did also I never said that explicitly in my mind, but I said like, I kind of feel like the house is on fire, so I want to talk about that, you know? And it just so happened that in the course of writing the book over the 7 years, especially during pandemic, I saw like the public, the zeitgeist, the general world starting to speak in the same terms I was using. That is to say, like abolition, for example, became like a public term that was used a lot, and it hadn't been before. No. And so it's sometimes like I didn't aim for it, but like I felt it really clearly, because it's almost as if like the conversation around what I was thinking about for those years of writing the book became like the main subject on the news. Yeah. And so there probably is a part of me that is like,
I'm gonna write this again. I got something to say.
Yeah, to leave the humility aside. Like, every single thing I ever wrote needs to be of cultural significance. Yeah. I'm like, because I'm me, no, but like, but because I write slow and I'm only gonna write so many books. Right. But sometimes it's just, to me, the attention and like energy you put into whatever you decide to engage.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. No, because I would think, because it is very personal, and it's true. I'm aware, like, you know, you're devoting a large part of your life to a project that I think my interests that come up in my work are things that are interesting to me as a person, right? So to the extent that I'm interested in what's going on around me or the world that I inhabit, that is somehow reflected in my work. Like, I can tell you though, and because you made me think about this, that the Rib King, and I was talking about this recently, because when I tried to explain it to people, no one, because it doesn't really make sense outside of me, because that was very much inspired by Trayvon Martin. Wow. The writing of that book, and it's about minstrelsy. So the connection, especially when I was working on it, but that was very personal. So, and I don't know in terms of significance, it was certainly...
But it was driving you.
Yes. So it was constituted out of sort of my sort of human, the things that were on my mind or in my heart, right? Yeah. And it came out in a very specific form, I would say. Yeah.
I feel that a ton. One of my professors and mentors, a guy named Arthur Flowers, Memphis bluesman Arthur Flowers, and in school, one time he told us, write a story to, I heard save the world. Mm-hmm. He said change the world, but whatever. Write a story to save or change the world. And if you look at my first book, there's a lot of stories that very directly deal with, because to me the other side of the question is like the political nature of stories. Some of my stories do deal directly with sort of political conversations, but the story that I wrote in response to that prompt was the shortest story in that book. It was called Things My Mother Said, and it had no overt political implications other than like, I love my mom.
It's a prose poem.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. And that's what I wrote. So to me, like in that same sort of vein, I 100% feel what you're saying. Sometimes it's just like, to me, there's a cultural impact of saying really deeply that I know things were hard, but I love you, Mom. You know what I'm saying?
That's beautiful.
No.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful sentiment. So we have this, you can't see it, we have this doomsday clock that's ticking down. And if we go past 0, bad things will happen to everybody on the stage. And so what that reminds me of is this idea, it's not my idea, there's a musician, I always talk about her, Joanna Newsom, she's a harp player out of California. And she has a song called Time as a Symptom. And it's the idea that love only exists because time is short. There's only so much time to get things done. If we had infinite time, we could all love each other equally. We could tell all the stories. But because we have finite time, we have to choose what stories to tell. So to the exact same point that's being made up here, I started late. Like, I'm like Toni Morrison. Not that I could write like her, but that I started late. I was 41 years old, my first book, right? And so it's like, well, Maurice, you could do like, well, I said his name earlier, Cord Jefferson. I could do like Cord Jefferson, like write for Succession for a few years and then go over to like The Good Place and then like do Watchmen and then make my own movie, but I ain't got that much time. So what can I tell? You know, what stories can I tell? And so for me, as somebody writing from this particular city in this particular time, it's like, well, what stories have not been told? I think about August Wilson and his Century Project, him going across his city over like a century and taking a decade and slicing up and getting like a play here, a play there, a play there. That's my mentality. In my short story collection, I had this one story that I think about. It's the biggest story. It's called Before I Let Go, you know, after the old Frankie Beverly and Mays song. And that protagonist is a 45-year-old lesbian black woman. I'd never seen a black woman like that in a New Orleans story ever. You might get like, you know, Treme, which was a pretty good show, but you wouldn't see her as like somebody who has her own story to tell. She's the hero of that story, and I gave her 39 pages because I'd never seen her have 39 pages before. Mm-hmm. So for me, significance, what I do is about what's important to me, and it's just like seeing, again, the community that's important to me and seeing them on page as much as possible because time is short. You know, as people in my faith say, tomorrow's not promised, you know? And so I don't want to go to an airport and like see my book and go, that's a throwaway book, and I was just playing around with that book. It's like, no. I really put everything into that book, and that's my very last book. I did my best job with that. If I go to like an event like this, I go to a church, and everybody's looking at me like, that Maurice, I messed up. But if they look at me like, you know, or give me a hug afterwards, I did an okay job. And so for me, that significance is tied to time, love, and also the community and how we interact with each other. Because it's my job to be a storyteller, to be one of the storytellers from my community and offer them something that they can be proud of and smile at when they see the stories in the world.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's great.
Yeah.
But Maurice, you just published a book about slavery.
I did?
Well, it's about many
goodness.
things. But in fact, well, I'm curious. I mean, you sit down. I mean, it's going to take time, you know, and research, a lot of research when you're going to go back. I mean, come on. I mean, was it important to you to write that story just because it hadn't been told?
Well, I mean, look, I learned
just to probe.
I learned from all the women in my life. My grandmother, who was a teacher and a church secretary and a mother and a grandmother. I learned from my mother, who was a home health care nurse, you know, and she had her whole life going how you can multitask. So the research for the American Daughters is a 20-year research project. I started literally in the summer of 2004. As I've told, I would go down to the French Quarter and find documents at the Historic New Orleans Collection. So I started doing that then. But I also knew that in 2005 I couldn't write that book. Because I needed to like grow for like 19 more years to get to that point to tell those stories. Yeah. And it wasn't just the research. Like there's the research of like, oh, here's a book, here's like a little, you know, wood cutting. But it's also like, do I actually understand my mother? Yeah. Like having been raised by her as a black man from the South, do I know who she really is to any extent at all? And my grandmother, who passed in 1998, it took me 15 years to look back at those memories with those people, at the pictures and the videos and like, you know, looking at diary entries and like getting, you know, stories from third parties and kind of going, you totally missed what they were trying to tell you in 1997. I can kind of see it now. And I think that when people read the book, they kind of go, why do these black women feel so realistic? But again, I couldn't have done that like in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, till maybe 5 years ago. And so the research is both external and internal.
It's there's something interesting about this conversation to me because, and I wonder how y'all feel like with writing, sometimes you have good days, you think like, you have good and bad days. There's bad days where you're like, oh my God, I can never do this. And there's days where you're like, this is crazy. I'm really about to win a MacArthur. Like, you know?
Tomorrow.
But there's also like, I feel like there's a strong sense for writers, but particularly black writers that like, this might be your only chance, whichever book you're putting out now.
Right.
And I just wonder how y'all feel about that in general. But also, I had the cool opportunity. The way I got introduced to Maurice's first book was I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. I had to do a review. And I remember thinking like, kind of in the context of this, like with that first book, you took like a really big shot. That wasn't a safe book. And I really respected that because I felt like to try to do something strange. Obviously it dealt with race in a way, but the book's called We Cast a Shadow, and it tried a lot of things in a really ambitious way, which I really respected. And I'm just interested for y'all, like the sense of, like I'm shocked it's like these two minds. This like one is like, I know for sure I was gonna write more than one book. I had a 2-book deal, but at the same time, like when they were talking about the novel, it was like, yeah, sure, all right. So like I'm interested, like if y'all have that feeling of like, this might be it, because that also means like it seems like it would push you towards striving for something like staying power or cultural significance or whatever.
I mean, lady, you write like a book every year pretty much.
No, I don't.
I mean, it feels like it. And they're all great. They're all fantastic.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Like,
I find, honestly, I can't write thinking like that. It's terrible. I have to put a certain amount of energy into like tuning all of that.
That
you know
sounds so
what I mean?
healthy. No, I 100% do.
It's not easy often, but I just, I don't really know how to write properly another way.
Yeah.
Like it requires a certain amount of honesty, so I feel like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it is kind of hard because you are absolutely aware of all of these things that are sort of surrounding
Pressures.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the writing, I mean, like in the actual writing, hopefully it's just about that thing. But like when you're like turning it in, you know what I mean? Like once you interact with that part of it, like that's where I feel it. In the writing, hopefully I'm just like here.
Right.
But once I'm like in the business, like that part, it all feels like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this again. Like sure.
No, that's me. That's totally me as well. I mean, look, I think that, like, for me personally, there's the aesthetic part of it. Like, is it a good book that I'm writing? But then there's also the life part of it. I'm a former corporate lawyer where the money was easy, but it was bad money. Representing, like, cigarette companies, gun manufacturers. You can't keep doing it and have, like, a healthy soul, right? So I left that world on purpose. But at the same time, I come from a huge family. My dad had 11 brothers and sisters. In my household, like, we have, like, my sister-in-law, we sent her like to college. Not even talks about that. It's not to say that publicly, but the idea is I have to make sure she was taken care of. So if I'm writing a book, I'm thinking, all right, is this my last book? Like, how's this contract gonna look? If I look back to like the mid-90s and all of the sort of elders who I love so much who were writing in that time period, very few of them are still writing actively today as African-American writers. So it's like, it's not their fault. They're still great. But somebody up in like this, skyscraper in New York is like, they just like pull a lever and say, aha, it's over. You can't write any more books. We're going to find some new black folks to put their books out. We're going to pick one per year.
That's what I'm
and so they lift them up like that. And it's like, who's calling those shots? So aesthetically, I don't think about it. But in terms of like the actual, like the business, I'm like, dude, you got to like try and stay hot as you can. Otherwise, they're going to like just push you out. Like, what is that? Showtime at the Apollo with the guy with the cane pulls you.
Oh man,
that's a deep cut for
y'all
out there.
I kind of just shut it out.
Yeah.
As I write when I want to write, I have the luxury of having a great job, and so I don't feel the pressure at all, which is really kind of weird.
I do feel pressure.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's what I need.
I just don't. I mean, I never quit the day job. So I don't have that kind of pressure. The money pressure, which is a
but
real.
But you're unique though
pressure.
in that you were making great work like literally 30 years ago, and you're on this stage with a book just came out a couple years ago. That's great. So
okay. So we'll come
he's
back.
like whatever, kid.
Thank
whatever.
you. All right. So seems to me, I'm reading. It is dangerous or worse, potentially boring, to create stories in which just race or gender or politics or war or whatever take precedence over love, romance, sex, humor, adventure, right? So I'm wondering if we could talk about trying to strike a balance between meaning, right, which I think in a way is what we're talking about with cultural significance, whether that's meaningful language or meaningful subject matter. How do you strike the balance between meaning and sheer entertainment? Because we read to be entertained, right? I mean, but we do want to write meaningful stories, which is what I'm hearing here. So how do you strike that balance? And maybe you can think of a moment in your own writing where you're like, this is, I need to make this more entertaining, or I need to make it more meaningful.
As a reader, I like both. I think
ideally you get them both.
Exactly.
I mean, all together. Huck Finn, hello.
Well, no, and also too, I don't want to. I mean, it's a form of to entertain people is also a form of engagement. So if you like, I think this conversation makes me a little uncomfortable because I have people come up to me and tell me they have like fears of being didactic. Yeah. Which is really, maybe you could just talk about it as good writing and bad writing, but I think a lot of times people are told they're not supposed to write about things that are actually important to them, and that somehow that is like a criticism.
Yeah.
I don't know if does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is the question we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think, like, for me, I try my best to sort of reject the dichotomy at all. Like, I'm completely at his face. Like, I think there is like a long, we have access to like academic writing, truly academic writing, which in its sort of like purpose of what it's trying to do, which is like to create an argument that will be read regardless sort of by the people who are very interested, that being entertaining is not a part of that particular craft. Yeah. And they happen to use letters just like us, so we have a good like reference point for like boring writing. But the idea that like, again, maybe this is like very nerdish, but like learning is fun. Like you can have fun and learn in the same breath. You can, in the same exact way, like a journalist, like a Pulitzer Prize winning, or any journalist, like a journalist is telling you information, but they're curating how they're doing it in a way that can keep you engaged. So to me, like
Walter Isaacson.
Yeah, it's a part. It's a part of the thing. Like, so I think about this with teaching as well. Like, pedagogically, like engagement is my bedrock, because no matter how good the lesson is, if everyone's asleep, they're asleep. Doesn't matter what I had to say. So how do I say what I mean by being entertaining, but also knowing that entertainment, and that's a part of life as well. And so like the part of why I sort of reject the dichotomy in I try to in my work is that seeing something fun or joyous is important for us to like train in our memory and our imaginations just as much as the history of like, you know, some blight or some pain. They're both really important for us to remember and even train in our imagination. And so like, I try my best to, that said, that's easier said than done, right? Because people like have an expectation of that dichotomy.
Yeah, well, people cross the line all the time. I mean, there is such a thing as didactic writing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to name names, but they're.
No, if I got a journal on, you know, how corn syrup has affected blah, 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 it wouldn't be that fun to read unless you're super interested in that. Yeah. Because that's not there.
Very well written too, but yeah.
It's going to be well written in a certain kind of way for academics. Yeah. But there's just a different type of, but if someone wanted to take that same information and present it in a way that was engaging, they could. And so I try my best to think of it as all the same and try my best to feel as though like the feeling of learning something new is a different type of engaging and entertaining. And I really care about that because I think it makes academia kind of suck. Yeah. Because it's almost like, here's the fun part, here's the learning, and then you learn to tune out for the learning part. Mm-hmm. And so I try, like, even the classroom, like, once you come into the classroom, this is gonna be fun. Mm-hmm. We're gonna learn, but that learning will be fun. And again, it's kind of like almost like bleeding heart of me, but I really do feel that way.
Mm. Well, there seems to be a book buying consensus that you're succeeding.
Yes, this is real.
I appreciate that.
Well, okay, I get this from both being a professor of creative writing, but also from being raised in the church. All right, little audience participation right quick. This is not a trick question, I promise you. If you have heard of a film, a motion picture called Barbie, please raise your hand. Have you heard of that movie, Barbie? Yeah, anybody? Okay, a few hands. All right, one more, just 2 questions. Second question, have you heard of a film called Zone of Interest? Raise your hand. Okay, so first was about 99%, second was about maybe 60, 70%. I'm asking that for a reason. There's dichotomies, but then there's also like scales. And the way I think of it is like this. Barbie is a movie that's interpretable by anybody. You know, this is an iconic toy that's been around for like 70 years now. You've seen it on the shelves. Maybe you own one yourself. Maybe you hated the doll. You're going to have an opinion even before you walk in the door. Then you go in the door, and you're like, oh, here's this weird movie. Either you love it or you hate it, one or the other. Greta Gerwig is like a master. She's the director of the film, right? She made Lady Bird, about a teenage white girl having some issues. That's a big audience for that. It's a big audience for that, right? Then I like her a lot, really I do. Her second movie is Little Women. It's one of the classic books of all time, right? These are big box movies, right? And Barbie's the exact same thing. Can anybody name another movie by the guy that made Zone of Interest? Anybody? Under the Skin, starring Scarlett Johansson as an alien lamb who walks around through Scotland naked. That's a real movie. Came out in 2015, right? Yeah. Birth, where Nicole Kidman's trying to sleep with this little boy who's 10 years old. These are real movies. My point is, when I look at those two creators, I think about Gerwig is like, all right, I want you to be able to understand this and be entertained by it. Whereas with the other guy, Glazer, he's like, this is going to be artistic. There's going to be meaning in it. And almost every time they make a movie, like she's like financially successful and he's critically successful. And then sometimes it's like a Venn diagram there. In my own writing, I'm probably more like Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer. I want big topics, big ideas, interesting characters, better dialogue than he does. I can say that. but also just like, like adventurous and strange is going to bring you on a journey. If the book is too flat, like my book has like inserts and metadata and like epilogues and like it got 2 prologues. In the first version of it, there was none of that stuff, and it felt too much like a Gerwig film, which I like. But I'm not Gerwig. I'm Christopher Nolan, and so I'm going to always add in things that will not really like lower the entertainment, but just make it more interesting, more granular, more specific, and that's my personal aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the lesson there is be cinematic.
Be Christopher Nolan, also Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
He's just everybody.
Well. And thanks for that review. You saved my life with that review. I've been meaning to tell him that. I've met you like 10 times now. I never got to tell you that. Look, I had just finished reading your book, and the first review comes out from the New York Times. And I'm like, oh Lord, because they can just
40 seconds.
Oh, they can just like X you out. And I was like, I read the review and I thought this person actually read the book, understood the book. And I just was so thankful for that. I mean that with the greatest possible sincerity, because we don't always get that in reviews, especially from our community. So
no, I had to. It was I cared that people try to take a swing, and I mean, besides it was good, and I was engaged and interested, and I like things that make me think about things that I've never thought of before. And it was my first time doing a review, and I felt like not qualified.
That was your first?
It was my first review, like for the Times.
Wow.
And
3, 2, 1.
My anxiety is like going crazy.
I'm
from this.
going
Anyways,
crazy.
Watchmen. It's like with the Doomsday Clock.
it means I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It was nothing though. I had to.
Somebody's
I loved
going to
it.
run a Q&A, which
We got
is gonna
Q&A
start
happening
now. Thank you, guys. That was
Yeah, they couldn't see like the little red dots appear on our foreheads when it hit 0 just now. It was
Where are we at?
very scary.
If you don't ask a question, we're gonna suffer. So
Please, stand.
If you don't, I'm going to ask
You gotta
another
stand
one.
over there.
Oh,
Maurice,
man.
don't call me out. I delivered this man's mail when he was a youngster, so I don't take the credit for that. But there was a question, Louis, that there's a statement that you made, and it resonated with me, and that is the fact about Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, one of my all-time favorite books, and also the fact I think it's centered in the American experience, even though that was written way before just about any of us in here were born. But how does the American canon of literature figure into any of y'all's work? And Brother Kwame, your book is going on my stack of shame, the books that I got to get around to, and I'm looking very forward to reading your book.
No pressure.
With Louis, I go back with 10 seconds. But the question is, how does that American canon of literature, and I'm thinking of Mark Twain, Toni Morrison, and particularly for me in this area, Walker Percy.
Wow.
Nice.
Really?
Well, I'm with you with Huckleberry Finn.
Are you? Okay.
Well, I mean, just-
you mentioned Percival Everett.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got the new book.
He got
being
James.
out. Thank God.
Which I can't wait to read that book. That book's I know it's gonna blow my wig. But like that book is really important. All right. So Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain is important in general because many people say, and you can debate it, but I think there's truth in this. In some ways, he's the first American writer because before he came up, it was like, I'm an American dude from Massachusetts. I'm writing this British story. With the fancy accents, like the top hat and the cane. He's like, I'm gonna do these dudes down in the South, in the woods somewhere, have American accents and tell American stories. And so there's a genesis there that creates like a Faulkner. It leads like up to like a Morrison and so forth, even to myself and to yourself. Now that you've said that to me, and I reviewed Ramadan Ramsey,
Yes, you
I can
did.
see the direct relationship between those two books.
Oh, can you? Oh.
The adventure. The kid goes on an adventure.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was almost called Adventures of Ramadan Ramsey.
Well, exactly.
The editor said, no adventure. Yeah, well, thank you. Others on the canon and the importance are not to what you do. Whatever, there are panels here, I think, this week on the canon. So.
I have a lot of thoughts on the canon on some, like, I think I'm grateful that I was introduced to so many different types of writing, and there's something cool about the Faulkners and the Twains and just like the seriousness through which that they were regarded. And it wasn't until later on where not people like, for me anyways, where I was given Toni Morrison or Baldwin or LSN or whoever you want to talk about. I think it's good to have some awareness of the canon because it lets you know, like, sort of like the games that have been played already. It kind of lets you know what is out of bounds, so you can go out of bounds. If that makes sense. But also in a lot of ways, the canon that is given in institutions, it's just so it can be really limiting.
Yeah.
It can make you. It can make. There's been times where my understanding of the canon has made me feel like most of what I'm trying to do is like kind of like not quote unquote literary, and so my relationship to it is that kind of like it goes back and forth because it can be really limiting in some ways if it's not curated properly. And for me, for a long time, it made me feel as though when I became aware of it, because as a reader, in the beginning, I was just reading whatever.
Yeah.
And I felt very comfortable reading quote unquote genre and feeling that may or may not have been considered literary. And I'm grateful for that because it broke me open before I even could get like, I had to learn to understand these like hierarchies that exist. I had to learn these like when I went to like MFA. I haven't read, I feel very ashamed to say, Huckleberry Finn. Like,
It's all right.
And a lot of that has created this style that I know I have now, which is a little bit hard to like put into a box. So.
But you seem infused. I'm sorry, am I taking over the question?
No, go ahead.
You seem infused with the more modern canon.
Yeah.
Whether it's Octavia Butler or George Saunders.
For sure.
Those seem to be.
And those people are very influenced by the canon that we're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
So sometimes you just need one step removed.
Right, he's one step removed. But,
We're all in the same game.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's killing it.
Well, obviously. So we have time for, I guess, maybe one more question or one Beyonce song, according to this timer right here.
Five, if somebody wants
Or two quick ones if you guys.
I'm telling you, if you don't, I'm
Quick
going to
hitters.
ask a serious question.
There you go.
Yeah.
How about Ryan Gosling as Ken at the Oscars? That was pretty good, right? We enjoyed that. Yes.
Yeah, can you all sing I'm Just Ken? So when you're thinking about like your stories and them being significant and sort of holding out like over time,
Oh, and what's your name, please?
what's my name?
Yeah.
Lucy.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, Lucy.
When you're thinking of like your writing and if it's gonna hold up over time, I feel like that can be very like paralyzing, sort of like when we're talking about like abolition and all of that stuff. Like that was super a huge thing that people were talking about in 2020, but unfortunately like focus has changed now and people are not talking about it that much, and it's just, you know, a couple of years. So is that something that is something that is a concern or even like a thought, or do you just sort of put it out there and hope for the best?
My quick answer on that is that I do and I don't. It's cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, when I'm writing, I'm just writing when I'm writing. And I'm really just trying to make myself pleased with the work. Yeah. You know, to not feel ashamed and not feel guilty, to feel like I've created something that is of artistic merit, but also if I go back to it, I can still read it 10 years later and go, hey, you were actually on that day when you wrote that paragraph. We don't get to decide what's going to last. I mean, I've seen the bestseller list, like from both America and Britain from like 1890. And it's like dozens of names where you're like, who are these people? You know, Anthony Trollope. Nobody reads Trollope anymore. Yeah. He was the highest paid writer of like 1895. You know what I'm saying? But I think what you can do, if I look even farther into the past, like Ovid, you know, the poet from ancient, you know, Rome or whatever like that, and Euripides, the playwright, is kind of like, there was a certain energy in the writing where they were like, we're just going to say what we're going to say, forget the consequences, and you're gonna remember my name and my style and my face, and hopefully that will last over time. But other than that, it's up for grabs. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't dictate that or predict that, and things kind of do tend to. I was thinking, because like the first novel, I think it came out in 2017.
Yeah.
And it had all these references to Du Bois in it, and people would tell me like, no one knows who that is.
That's true. That's
and
true.
It's like that was like a whole generation ago, and it really wasn't that long ago. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the answer, really, in my opinion, was you should know.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make the issue
really should know.
any less important whether or not it's like there's chatter surround. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
and to be honest, I kind of hope that a book like Chain Gang becomes like obvious and obscure. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Why do we
Like,
need that one?
I don't mind. To me, it's like if I'm one drop in the wave that, like, a literal like drop in like a tidal wave that made anything happen. I don't need like my little drop named. Like, I don't care so much about like Nana or my book being like acknowledged as much as like saying the thing that I think needs to be said. And so even though like it's less talked about for sure, though, I know for a fact that the conversation has put pressure on these powerful entities across this country and the whole world, actually. And so it's almost like, even if you obviously go 5 steps forward, 4 steps back, whatever, but abolition we know what that means now.
Yeah.
More of us now know what that means than we did. And so that maybe sometimes that's, it's not a straight line. And so to me, I feel good about that already. So like you almost can't erase that. It's like we got enough progress that we took one step enough that can't be erased, and I'll take that.
But more than just a drop, though, and this is a true story. I guess we got to finish on this. 2 days ago, I did an event in DC, and somebody said, "Oh, you gonna be with you gonna be down in New Orleans with your boy?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they say, before Friday Black, nobody was talking about the apocalypse like that. And I said, "Wait a second." And I thought back, and I'm like, that's real. That's an actual drop that makes a wave that actually changes reality. And I mean, look, I reread that book all the time because I'm always trying to figure out what is it that, I mean, obviously you know what you did, but you did something.
I don't.
You did something. Somebody knows.
Yeah.
But in terms of like looking into the future, just don't be Salieri. You ever see Amadeus? Don't be like the person who's like, I'm really the greatest. It's not this guy. We're just doing our work, and hopefully that in of itself will make people kind of go, oh, because it's only rock and roll. It's not heart surgery. We're not curing cancer.
What we're talking about is crossing from being culturally significant
Yeah.
to being culturally influential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're all doing that.
Well, we hope. Yes, we try.
3,
That's all you can do.
2, 1, and Woo! It's like one of your stories.
Thank you guys so much. That's really kind.
Thank y'all. Thank you.